Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. My name is Carla Lane. I'm in California today, speaking to you from there about a project that we developed at the California State Library some years ago called Get Involved, powered by your library. The idea was to provide training and support to libraries on best practices in volunteer engagement, and we also created a statewide partnership with VolunteerMatch, who, if you're not familiar with them, they're sort of the 900-pound gorilla in online volunteer recruitment. In the first 5 years of the Get Involved project, we saw a 52% increase in volunteers in California, but we had not just great success in recruiting more people, but also in the kind of work they were doing to help libraries to do things that were maybe not traditionally considered volunteer positions, helping them to expand and enhance programs and services. Another thing we found from Get Involved was that 80% of the volunteers who came to us through our partnership with VolunteerMatch.org had never volunteered in a library before. And we saw this as a huge advantage, that we were actually reaching new community members and engaging them with the library in new ways. And we found from our research that those folks, many of them naturally turned into strong library supporters and advocates. As a result of the success we had in California, we had the opportunity to expand this to a four statewide project with a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And we're just into the third year of that grant, working with Arizona, Idaho, and Texas, along with California. And as a result of that, we were led to a book that I was asked to write on what we found out, which you see here. And I want to share with you what we learned through this process, what we're continuing to learn as well. And before we're done, I'll also share with you some other resources that you can gain access to help you in your efforts as well. But let's start with what I'm hoping we're going to get done today, that my learning objectives for this hour are, first of all, to help you identify trends that are requiring a shift in the traditional way we've worked with volunteers. If many of you have been volunteers for a long time or have engaged volunteers for a long time, and I'm one of those, I count myself as someone like that, and what we've learned over the course of this project is that there are trends that are shaping the way we need to interact, and it requires us to do some tinkering with how we've always done things. Second, we're going to talk about how you can inventory your organization's needs and think about how some of your needs could be filled with skilled volunteers, people who have the skills that you don't currently have access to get the work done that you want to get done. Then, most importantly, we're going to talk about designing effective volunteer job descriptions, because that's the basis of the engagement and basis for recruitment. And then I'm going to share with you a targeted recruitment plan you can use to help you find those skilled volunteers that you need. So let's start by talking about today's volunteer. What are the trends? How do we attract them? And I'm going to start with some generational information. And you all know that a generation is defined as a group of individuals born and living contemporaneously who have common knowledge and experiences that affect their thoughts, attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And so really our generational differences are based on common life experiences. And I want to share with you some research that's been done and give you ways to think about this in terms of engaging the different generations in volunteer experience. Now, the first group you see, you're all familiar with the silent generation. But first, I want to give some context here. We're going to talk about generational differences, but I just want to be sure you understand that that these events that we're going to talk about, the things that sort of shape the way we look at the world, that helps us to think about how we might approach that group, but certainly it doesn't describe every single person in that generation. So we're going to do some generalizations here, but I think they will be helpful to you. So starting with the silent generation, these are our current senior volunteers, the people we've been working with and calling senior volunteers. And they were, of course, shaped by World War II. and guided by the patriotic values and being willing to do whatever they needed to help. Most of the women were not in the workforce, and therefore volunteering was really a socialization effort as well as service. So to think about the silent generation, I want you to think about Sean Connery and Judi Dench. They're in the silent generation age group. Then we get to the baby boomers, which is where I fit in. We were born in 1946 to 64. We are currently ages 55 to 73. So we are not seniors, and we actually don't like to be called seniors. So just a little FYI, some of you I'm sure can relate to that. But our thinking about the world was shaped by the Vietnam War, Watergate, the environment and civil rights and women's movements. We've all been in the workforce, so that shapes a little bit differently how we approach the world. We're a little bit healthier, and we're thinking about Oprah Winfrey and George Clooney are in the baby boom generation. We had some trouble when we first started this project with libraries believing that baby boomers were really old people. And here's the news. We are getting older, but we are not the older senior volunteers that you're used to working with. So Gen X came after us. These are the folks that were born in 1965 through 1980. Think about them. Because their parents were in the workforce, they were the first latchkey generation. They were the first generation exposed to cable TV and personal computers and video games. They've really been focused on their career path, and they've been a little frustrated with the baby boomers. So they're looking at what kind of opportunities might help them advance their career. And when you think about who those Gen Xers are, think about Christina Aguilera and Matt Damon. In the mid-2000s, as baby boomers began to turn 50, the research revealed that no longer would the current volunteer roles be enough to attract this generation of volunteers. We were interested in opportunities that could use our skills, be flexible, use our time wisely, and could demonstrate how our efforts would make a difference. Although Californians Get Involved focused initially on baby boomers, we quickly learned that the retooling we were asking libraries to do in their volunteer engagement practice to attract boomers was also helping with outreach to the generations that follow, like Gen X and now millennials. So I'm going to add another group. We've all probably talked about millennials. I'm going to add Gen Z to this list. And for those of you who are interested, the podcast that I mention up there in the heading is really interesting. It's very short and well worth a listen if you have a chance. But the millennials are currently ages 23 to 38. They're digital natives. September 11th and social media have shaped the way they look at the world. They have values that include lifelong learning and work-life balance. And they are Ryan Gosling and Justin Bieber, who you probably know about them. And finally, Gen Z has just been named this. These are folks that have been born 1997 up to now. They are growing up in a different economy thanks to September 11th and the Great Recession than the most of us have experienced. They are deeply embedded in social media. They are interestingly the most ethnically diverse generation. 48% of them identify as ethnic or racial minorities, and they are more likely to graduate high school and be enrolled in college than previous generations. Now, when I went looking for a name of a Generation Z pop star, I had a really hard time. I didn't see any names I recognized until I got to Millie Bobby Brown. Now, she's from the Netflix series Stranger Things. She's only 15 and was born in 2004. So that just gives you a sense. So just remembering that these are generalizations we're talking about. They won't fit every boomer or Gen Xer or Gen Zer specifically, but it does give us a sense of how each generation looks differently at the world, and therefore how they might deal with trends like technology, the world of work, and how they might look at social and civic engagement. So I'm guessing that you've had more than one conversation in your friends group about how to recruit younger volunteers from boomers on down, because you want to ensure that the future of the important work that you're doing in the Friends of the Library continues. So that's a reason for us to think about these generations and how we might reach out to them. One more piece I'm going to give you on millennials, which I found interesting. That link that you see there in the slide is is an article on this from which this data comes. And I'll share with you now that I have put some links into the PowerPoint slides. So if any of you would like to have the PowerPoint slides after this session is over, please feel free to email me. It's C-Lane, C-L-E-H-N at califa.org, C-A-L-I-F-A.org. I'll repeat that a little later too. So here are just some more reasons why you want to be thinking about younger volunteers. Millennials, 90% of them read to research something they like. 72% would rather read a printed book over a digital book. They read an average of 5 books per year. They're more likely to read the news than watch it. And they go to the library more than any previous generation. So if you've been writing them off as kids with their nose stuck in their phones, you need to rethink that. This is the future of our libraries and our friends groups. So let's look at some of the trends that we first noticed with boomers in relation to their volunteer engagement. And as I mentioned, we have found through the course of this project that the tinkering and the issues that are identified by boomers helped us to reach out to the generations that follow. So any of this tinkering that you do will help you with the future generations. First of all, they want flexibility and a wide variety of options. Baby boomers and the generations that follow don't want to be just offered one way to get involved. They want to see what's available. They want to have lots of different things that might be of interest to them, and they want them to be flexible opportunities, not just something where you're asked to come on every Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock and we'll tell you what to do when you get here. That's not how the new generations look at volunteer engagement. Secondly, they want to engage their skills and expertise. They have something they believe is meaningful and could be helpful to the organizations they serve, and they want to be able to engage that to make a difference. Which leads us to a really important thing that these generations are interested in volunteerism, and that is they want to know how what they do makes a difference. You have to show them the impact they're making on the mission. It will no longer be good enough just to tell them how many hours they served this year or to give them a certificate that says, thanks for making a difference. They want to know, what difference did I make? How many preschoolers got access to new materials? How many books in different categories got sold? How did the money that we gave to the library make a difference in what the library is able to do for the community? So it's very important to shape communications with these volunteers around what kind of impact they're going to make if they spend some of their time with you. These volunteers also expect clear expectations of time, tasks, and training. And those of you that go back with me a ways to the old way we used to do volunteer management, we used to be even timid about the idea of asking volunteers to go through training. How could we ask them to do that when they're already giving us their time to do this other work we've asked them to do? Well, this is different now. We are comfortable with training. We get it. We've been in the workforce. We know that in order to be successful, we need to understand what our role is and sometimes learn something new. We also want to know specifically how much time you're going to ask from me and how often, and what are the tasks that you're going to need me to get done, and then make sure I have the training I need to get it done. So in short, what we're talking about here is going beyond volunteer management, which is sort of the old way that we talked about this. We're talking now about volunteer engagement. How can we bring people in and engage their skills and expertise in meaningful ways to help us meet the goals that we have for the Friends and for the library? How can we tinker with what we're currently doing to address these trends and make sure that we can get on to the next thing and bring in those new generations at the same time? So I have a couple of strategies for you, and we're going to start with strategy number 1, which is designing roles for skilled volunteers. Now, the list that you see there are actual roles that libraries in our project have designed and recruited and utilized over the course of our project. Job center coach, event planner, graphic designer, photographer. I will mention the public relations specialist. That's somebody I recruited when I was at the State Library to help me create a public relations plan for a 30th anniversary statewide celebration of the adult literacy program. I am not a public relations person. I don't have public relations background, but I found somebody with amazing skills who became available to me and made that project a success. And he did it because it was easy for him to do, because he had those skills, enjoyed using them, and was interested in the issue that we were talking about having him be involved in. Now, the link there at the top of that slide is a list of other really great ideas for ways to get skilled volunteers involved. I know some of you are thinking, what kind of skills would be useful to you? But I want you to open your minds and think beyond what you've currently got volunteers doing. You know, could you use an event planner who could help you put things together? Some other things that come from that list include designing and conducting surveys or doing focus groups for you. Or how about, could you use somebody to develop a social media strategy for you? Or to reach out to reporters to help generate news coverage of what your activities are? Or how about a strategic planner, somebody who'd be willing to come in and help you design what the future of the organization looks like? So think beyond your current ways of engaging volunteers, and that's what we're talking about. And in order to find these people, we have to design roles for those skilled volunteers. So it requires that we talk about volunteer job descriptions. And if you haven't found them already, there are some handouts available there. You can see the tab that says handouts, and I will be talking about them. So I'm going to be starting with the two job descriptions, volunteer public speaker, you can see there. If you haven't downloaded them yet, you might want to do that. But let me start with what the elements of a volunteer job description are. So many times I go in to work with a library and ask them to see their job descriptions, and usually it's just a listing of 10 things they need to do. That's not enough for today's volunteer. They have more questions. They have more issues before they say yes to taking on a job. They want to understand it more clearly. So we're going to use a descriptive title. We're not just going to say friend of the library or library volunteer. We're going to say we need a public relations specialist who can come in and design our PR for the book sale, or something that describes in the title what the job might be. In the position overview and impact, we're going to tell them right then a little bit about what the job is and how is it going to make a difference if they take on the job. Then there's the responsibilities. We're going to add those in, but we're also going to tell them about qualifications required for the job, training and support we're going to provide. What are the benefits of them getting involved as a volunteer in this position? We're going to tell them how much time and for how long, and we're going to tell them who they're going to be working with inside the organization. So let's just take a look at the first sample job description. You'll see part of it here on the screen, but hopefully you've downloaded the full job. So I can sort of demonstrate to you what these how this plays out in terms of what goes on a job description. So first of all, you give it a title, and you notice it's not volunteer or friend, it's public speaker. And the reason for that is we're seeking people who have public speaking skills. So if you're like 90% of the country and you hate the thought of being a public speaker, you will know immediately that this job is not for you. On the other hand, if you're like me and public speaking is an easy thing to do, then you'll go, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Let's see how that skill that I have could be useful to this organization. So under the position overview and impact, we give them just a glimpse into what the job is. Again, we're trying to help them make an informed decision about whether this is a position they might be interested in and whether they have the skills for it. So here what we've said is the public speaker's job is to make presentations about the library to community groups to raise awareness about what the library has to offer to attract potential library users, volunteers, and supporters. So what we've told them there is, okay, I'm going to be making presentations to community groups. Okay, that's cool. And I see what the impact is. I'm going to be helping the library bring in more community members in a number of different ways to get involved with the library. So I've given a brief overview and an impact statement in that one succinct sentence. That's what goes there. Under key responsibilities, your goal is to give these potential volunteers a very clear picture of what the job looks like so they can decide if they see themselves in the job or not. So let's just look at this one real quickly. The first responsibility is to attend a 2-hour orientation on the library and its public speaking objectives, presentation outline, and materials that have been prepared. Now that gives the potential volunteer a lot of information. First of all, it's just a 2-hour thing we're doing, but secondly, the library's already created the materials for me. I don't have to create the materials. I just have to learn what is in them. I have to understand the background about the library, and then I just apply my public speaking skills to that. Okay, I can do that. Number 2, this volunteer is going to respond to requests to speak based on their schedule when the Speakers Bureau coordinator calls you with a speaking engagement. So read in there what really sounds good, and that is based on your schedule. I'm going to get a phone call. If I can do it, I will, and if not, I'll pass. And finally, this volunteer will be reporting data on the number of attendees, the particular interests of the group, and or unanswered questions to the Speakers Bureau coordinator within 3 days. So that just tells me, okay, I'm going to give the feedback right after I've completed it. So do you see how that really shapes the look of this job, helps the volunteer decide whether this is something of interest to them or not? Then we give them the qualifications, which in this case, we're going to ask them to commit to the library's vision and mission. And if they don't know that yet, they're going to learn it when they come to that 2-hour orientation. But the qualification also is that they have successful public speaking experience. So what we're saying to them is we're not seeking people who would like to learn how to be public speakers. We're seeking people who have that experience, who have been successful with that skill, who we can help train to deliver our message out in the community for us. We also list on the job description the training and the support they're going to get, right? So that they know that they're not alone in this. So we're going to give them that orientation, give them the objectives and the outline, and we're going to give them access to a Speakers Bureau coordinator as needed. The first question people always have is how much time is this going to take? So we're going to tell them, you make your best guesstimate about how much time per month or per week, however you want to describe it. In this case, we've said, we think it's going to be an average of 3 to 5 hours per month based on the number of speaking engagements offered to you that fit into your schedule. So we're making a really clear point in this job that you can say no when we call you, but if you're available, we won't ask you to do more than 3 to 5 hours per month. The length of commitment you can't see on the screen, but hopefully you've got the job description in front of you. We've suggested a minimum 6-month commitment. And why is this? This sends a message to people that says, look, we're serious about this. We're going to invest some resources in you, and therefore we'd like you to at least say that you could stay for 6 months. Now, does that create a contract? No, but it does tell people what your intention is, that you are interested in bringing on people who are serious about being interested in this job. Then we list the benefits to volunteering. And why do we do this? Because volunteers are not motivated by us. Volunteers are motivated by something inside themselves. So usually if you ask a volunteer, why do you want to volunteer? They'll say, oh, because I care about the organization, or I love the library, I want to be helpful. And that's great, that's true. I'm sure that's part of what they want to do, but they probably also have another motivation for wanting to engage themselves in this job. And so in this case, we've said the benefits of volunteering are to assist the library in spreading the word, to attract new users and supporters, to utilize skills in public speaking, and it's also an opportunity to develop new community contacts because they're going to be out in the community speaking on our behalf. We tell them who they're going to be working with. We tell them the location in this case. In this case, we've said that aside from the training and other meetings at the library, most of the work for this position will be done at the locations where community groups have presented a presentation. So this is somebody who's going to go out to the Elks and the Lions and the Rotary and all those and make presentations on your behalf. So let's look at another interesting idea here, is because when we start adding more and more volunteers into the system, that drains the resources of the people who are engaging the volunteers. So we want to look at how can we continue to add more people and not just have one project demanding all the time available that we have. So we came up with this idea of the Speakers Bureau coordinator being a volunteer. Now think about this. This is the person looking at the position overview and impact. This is the person who manages the library project that delivers presentations about the library to community groups, just like we said about the speaker, but this person manages that project. And you see their responsibilities have changed a little bit because we've even asked if they would come and help the library director develop the speaking materials, right? They're going to also be charged with recruiting, training, and acknowledging the volunteer public speakers. They're going to be the one who identifies the priority community groups to contact to schedule a speaking engagement, and then call the speakers to see who's available to make each of those on their calendar. And then they're going to track and report volunteer hours and statistics and report them to whoever their quote-unquote supervisor is, somebody that will be collecting that information. So think about the difference here. Now, a couple things to think about is, one, having this two-layer level of sort of management volunteer, which is another skill, right? People with organization and management skills. One of the advantages that is it takes some of the need to manage all those individual volunteers away from the person who designed this job. It gives you another layer of folks that can help you with this. And secondly, it's an opportunity for you possibly to promote somebody, one of the speakers who you know has great project management skills and good community contacts. You might ask them, would you consider serving as our Speakers Bureau coordinator? Now think about how that feels to you if you're one of the speakers and they come to you and say, you're doing such a great job, we'd like to ask you to do more. Right? In the old days, we would have thought, oh gosh, we can't ask somebody to do even more than they're already doing for us. That's crazy talk. But now what we know, because of the motivations and the interests of the new generations of volunteers, in their interest in gaining new skills, in sharing their skills, in creating opportunities where they might learn new things, that giving them an opportunity to be promoted into a management or a project management position can be also viewed as a promotion and feel really good for the volunteer. So I want you to think about using these two job descriptions as an example. And I was limited to the number of handouts I could provide for you today, but don't worry, I have hundreds more sample job descriptions like this that have been created and utilized effectively by libraries that are available to you through our Get Involved Clearinghouse. And I will give you that web address before we leave today, so that if you have to think about what kinds of things could we do, how could we utilize volunteers, just think about what are the things you wish you could get done and you just can't get done yet. That has to be pretty painful. And what I've found in my life, I've always thought, when I need a skill and I don't have it myself, maybe there's a volunteer who would help me do it. And that's how I want you to start thinking about this, that there are folks out there who may not even know the library or the Friends need volunteers, but they might be interested in helping by sharing the skills that they have to help you achieve a need that you have. Okay, I'm going to go to strategy number 2, which is targeted recruitment. And this differs from the old way we used to do recruitment, I call warm body recruitment, where we would put a sign on the circulation desk or post a flyer at the book sale and say, volunteer here. And I had a volunteer in a training years ago come up and say to me, he says, whenever I see those signs on the circulation desk, I don't go near them because I'm terrified that what they're going to ask me to do is spend every Saturday until I walk into the grave. So we have to find a different way of targeting people who have a particular interest in what we're offering and not just looking for any warm body that can come in. Now, the good news is that your targeted recruitment starts with that job description. So once you've identified the job, it's helped you as a planning tool think through how many hours are you going to need somebody for? What skills are they going to need to have? How will they interact with staff or other volunteers? And once you have that, sometimes when I write a job description, the person who could be the perfect candidate for that job just jumps off the page at me. But oftentimes you'll need to go seeking somebody with skills that you've identified in that job description, and so that's where we begin. We remember that not every warm body fits every position, so our goal here is to try to find people who have the qualifications, the interests, the skills, the time availability to complete this job that we've written and fit them with exactly the right job. And the reason we want to do that is that if you if you've ever had a bad experience with volunteers, if you've ever had volunteers who come once and don't show up again, or they do the job incorrectly, or they step on the toes of another volunteer, another staff person, the reason all of that is happening is because they are not bad people. It's because they are unclear about what their role is. They're not clear about how they're supposed to interact with other staff and volunteers. They're not clear specifically about where their job begins and ends. And that's why you've got to have this job description and put the right body in the right position. So when you've done some recruitment, and we're going to talk about how to do that, you probably already do it in a number of ways. One kind of recruitment I'm going to focus on in a few minutes is adding online recruitment to your mix of recruitment opportunities, because that's a gold mine of people that you've never even met before or never maybe heard of the library before. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But what I want you to do is come up with a pool of people whose skills and interests fit the job that you're trying to recruit for. Then you're going to screen them, you're going to interview them, you're going to answer their questions, they're going to answer your questions, and you're going to find the right person to make a good fit for the job. Because once you've found that, once you've made a good fit, those are people who are going to stick around for a while, right? If people leave, it's because they weren't happy, they were put in a job they didn't like, or they didn't feel prepared to do, and nobody wants to volunteer to be unsuccessful. Everybody comes because they want to have some success at helping at something they believe is important in their community. So one of the things you need to think about is to not be limited to who you know. If you don't know the person that you're looking for, if you don't know an awesome public relations specialist that has 5 years of experience working in statewide public relations campaigns, which is what I needed, then you need to talk to other people. You need to reach out beyond who you know. Reach out in your recruitment, including online, to see how you can find somebody who has this. If you're looking for a particular volunteer skill, a particular volunteer assignment, and you can't find someone, if you haven't told the library director, if you haven't told the board, if you haven't told all the friends, if you haven't told the staff what you're looking for and shared with them your job description, you may never find the right person, right? They may know exactly the right person and could bring that person to you, but you may not be able to find them if you don't enlist others in helping you. I'll give you 2 examples of skilled volunteers in my history. One, my public relations specialist I mentioned, I found him on LinkedIn. He didn't even know there was a state library. He had no clue that he was living in a town where there was a state library building or what the state library did. But he was intrigued by the fact that we were looking for a high-level public relations person like him who had experience working in large regional and statewide public relations campaigns, and he was intrigued by our issue, which at that time was our adult literacy program statewide. We were looking for somebody to help us create a public relations campaign to bring in more volunteers as tutors because we had a very large waiting list, as well as to just increase people's awareness about the issue of adult literacy. And another one was back when I worked for United Way, I needed to bring in I was asked to bring in the new president of the local university, find him a place in our volunteer structure. Well, I couldn't have called his office and said, can I come over? Because I was a nobody, right? But I could reach out to somebody I knew who could reach out to him. And in this case, I reached out to our board president, who was a prominent member of the business community. He had no trouble getting on the president's schedule, and he just invited me to attend. And once we got there, they did their, little socialization work and hi, welcome to the business community, welcome to Sacramento. Carla, what job do you have in mind for Don? And I had prepared 2 or 3 job descriptions based on what I could think about, what he might be willing to bring to us as the president of a university. So I had somebody else open the door, but I made the sale. And that's the way I want you to think about this, is that you don't have to scare all your friends off by thinking that you're always going to ask them to be the ones who do the work. You're going to reach out into the community and bring in people who you may never have known in any other way. And that not only helps you get the right person, it helps you reach out into the community in a way that you haven't reached out before. But the last thing I want to say here is that people always ask me, or people just say to me, do I have to take every volunteer that presents themselves? And the answer is no. It's hard to say no sometimes, but there are good reasons to say no. And if you have a good volunteer job description, they will help you. So you need to give this potential volunteer an opportunity to say no. Don't sell them on taking the job unless they really want it. Do they have the skills? Do they have the time? Is this of interest to them? What about the qualifications? Do they fit? Because I'll tell you that it's better to have a vacancy than to have the wrong volunteer in the position. Because when that happens, when you've got the wrong volunteer in the position, now you've got a personnel problem. And whether that person is paid or not, you've still got a personnel problem. So what you want to do is be sure that you're putting the right person in the right job, and you can avoid all those problems that you're worried about by that careful screening and careful selection. Put someone in the right position in the first place, and life is better for everybody. Now, there's another handout for you called the Targeted Recruitment Plan, and this is what the top of it looks like, because I want you to think about, this is a little worksheet you can use to help you find just the right person. So those top two boxes come directly from the volunteer job description that you wrote. So you're going to lay the job description down next to this Targeted Recruitment Plan, and you're going to fill in those two blocks. What qualifications did we decide this person had? 5 years experience in statewide public relations campaigns, whatever it is. You know, they have experience in merchandising, they have experience or skills in event planning, whatever are on the job description, that's what you're going to put in the qualifications. And then you're going to put in what benefits will the volunteer receive. You know, are they going to get an opportunity to share their skills? Are they going to get a chance to meet people? Are they going to gain skills? Are they going to gain experience? Are they going to gain community contacts? What are the benefits for the volunteer? Start there. Start with those two boxes. And the middle two boxes starts helping you to locate them. So how do you find people with these qualifications? Is it a particular profession? Is it a particular age range or a particular educational level? How might I find, so I'm looking for a public relations professional, or maybe I'm looking for an event planning professional. That starts to zero in on where you might find those people. And then you ask yourselves, where do those people congregate? And most of you know that there's a professional association for everything, right? I used to belong to the Association of Associations. I know that seems odd, but there is one. And their luncheons were fascinating to me because I always sat around a round table, and I had somebody 1 month on the right-hand side, I had the California Nurses Association. On the left, I had the California Visitors and Conventions Bureau Association. And the next month I had the California Dental Association, and on the left was the California Auto Dismantlers Association. Now that day, a light bulb went off over my head because I said to myself, there is an association for everything, and that's a place you can always go to look. And if you don't know where to look for associations, go no further than the reference desk at your library, because there is information about all the professional associations there. Or maybe it's a service club. For example, the Lions are well known for their interest in working with the visually impaired. Or maybe a corporate volunteer program. You know, the REI is well known for working on the environment or for outdoor activities. Or maybe it's a faith community. I was working on a breast cancer project at one point in my life, and we went to the local faith community to have them help us advertise the services that were available to women on Mother's Day, and they were very happy to help us do that. So that's what you're doing here, is you're creating a list of where you're going to find these people. And the two boxes on the bottom, which you can't see on the slide, but you can see on the handout, there's 3 boxes. First of all, are personal connections. Who do you know? Who knows people like this, right? If you're looking for a PR professional, do you know somebody in the public relations field, or does your spouse know somebody in the public relations field? Or how about does the library director go to the Rotary Club, and does that person ever meet up with any public relations professionals? You're going to utilize all the resources you have at your fingertips to identify actual individuals in addition to locations where you might go to find people. And then when you find some individuals you want to talk to, you've got somebody who can help you open the door, like the example I gave of my board president opening the door for me to recruit the president of the university. Then you look at what local volunteer recruitment options you have. Some of you have a local volunteer center or a hands-on network or United Way. These organizations have as part of their mission to help other organizations in the community recruit and place volunteers. So look to see what you have available. And in the bibliography that I've provided as a handout, you'll find a link to all those, how you can find out in your location. And finally, an online recruitment source. Do you have access to online recruitment? And if not, why not is my question. And let me go there to strategy number 3. So I want you to consider adding online recruitment to your mix of recruitment, because there is so much capacity out there. There's so many places. In addition to VolunteerMatch.org, which I'm the most familiar with because we partnered with them, there are a number of others. I will show you their websites in a moment, but the Points of Light Foundation has a recruitment serve. The federal government has a recruitment site. There's also one called DoSomething.org that's focused on young volunteers. So there's lots of places you can make yourself available to people online. And I want you to think about this concept of virtual volunteering. This is something that where the volunteer completes all or most of the assignment without ever coming to see you, right? How is that possible? Maybe they could write a grant proposal or a newsletter or translate documents into another language. I have some examples that I'm going to share with you in just a moment of virtual volunteering. But the final reason to think about engaging volunteers online is that this opens volunteer recruitment and service opportunities up to people with disabilities. People who are so disabled that they can't come to your location, or they wouldn't be able to do some of the kinds of lifting or pushing or standing jobs that you have available. There are many things they can do from home online as a virtual volunteer. So let's just talk about some of those online recruitment resources. This is VolunteerMatch.org. People come to here all hours of the day and night. They type in their zip code and they get a listing of volunteer opportunities that are available. They can click on one which sends an email message to you and puts you in touch with them so you can start talking to them. Now, to give you just an idea of the reach of these online recruitment systems, I want to show you some information I know about VolunteerMatch. First of all, they have 15 million unique visitors come to volunteermatch.org every year. And in addition, they have a partnership with LinkedIn, where 10 million LinkedIn professionals allow themselves to have volunteer opportunities sent to their inbox as a result of their relationship with VolunteerMatch. So when you post things on VolunteerMatch that have a skill that somebody in your community has and they said they are interested, they'll get an email message that says, here, we found a volunteer opportunity that might be of interest to you. And just one more way I'll emphasize, at least in VolunteerMatch's case, they have relationships with over 130 companies like Starbucks and JetBlue and many others that are connected immediately to their employee volunteer programs. So when you post something on VolunteerMatch, that will automatically become visible to any of those employees within the 20-mile radius of the location that you've posted. So I just wanted to share that and expand that out to the other groups. I'm not as familiar with the reach that they have, but I will show you the other websites in just a moment. So I want to give you an example of a virtual volunteer, and this is the link. There is a little YouTube video that you can go listen to, but I'm just going to describe quickly. This is Becky, who's the director of a small library in Texas. She needed a new logo for her 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten project, so she posted it on VolunteerMatch as a virtual volunteer opportunity, one that can be done from anywhere, and she got a bunch of applicants, and she asked each of them to send a sample of their work and a rough draft of their idea for what they would do for her. So she took those responses, she picked the one she liked best, and the person she liked best was a volunteer in Pennsylvania, a graphic designer in Pennsylvania. So the two of them never met, but that volunteer created not only this logo that you're looking at, but also some additional collateral graphic pieces that were used throughout that 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten project. And here's another example. This is Maggie. She's the director of the Johnson City, Texas Public Library. Johnson City has a population of 1,600 people, but she serves the whole county of 5,000 people. She told me that she is the director, but she has only one other staff person, and they both feel very technologically challenged. They really needed help to update their computers, to problem solve, and so much more. So she posted her need on VolunteerMatch. And within a few days, she got a phone call from these two guys that you're looking at because they saw it on LinkedIn because of the connection between VolunteerMatch and LinkedIn. And they called her and said they'd like to come in and talk to her about it. They saw this as an opportunity to help both the library and to get better known in town because they had just come to town and started their own tech support business. After they met and agreed to start working together, they started coming every other week and helped Maggie solve all kinds of technical issues and problems. And in the meantime, she got a makerspace grant. She mentioned it to these two volunteers, and they were so excited about the opportunity to get their hands on that equipment. They said, let us help you make a space for it in the library. Let us help you set it up, and we'd love to be support services for that to help make sure that our community has access to this awesome technology. So those are two examples of how online recruitment worked for in this case, very small libraries. And I mentioned my friend Dan, who was the public relations strategist. I found him online. I would have never found him any other way, and he would have never found me. So here are some other online options. Here's the Points of Light Foundation's Get Involved. This is you can search for volunteer opportunities on Points of Light. You can search, this is the federal government's answer to this. This is serve.gov. And here's dosomething.org, which I mentioned is focused on young people. Now, I've given you a lot of information here, but I also want to leave you with lots of other resources you can use so that you can try to implement some of these processes and make your friends of the library exactly what you want it to be by reaching out to skilled volunteers. I mentioned the Get Involved Clearinghouse. It's literally getinvolvedclearinghouse.org. This is where we have stored all the materials that have been developed for this project, hundreds of volunteer job descriptions, lots of management tools like volunteer applications, handbooks, policies, all kinds of stuff is in there. There's also training materials, so you can, anybody has access to that. It's all available for you to download and use. You can find things that might be interesting to you and pick and choose from what other folks have written in their job descriptions to create one that fits the need that you have. If you're interested in getting into VolunteerMatch, I actually videotaped a little tour of how it works, and you can find it at that link there. But I'm sure that's true of the other online locations, although I don't have as much specific experience with them. I'm sure you can find that they have support for folks as well. Our Get Involved collaborative, the 4 states that you see pictured in green there in the top left, are continuing to provide free webinars about different topics. We provide some, and we also make available information about other free webinars that are available on topics of interest to folks working in volunteer engagement. And you can watch for announcements and registration information right on the clearinghouse. So when you go to getinvolvedclearinghouse.org, one of the things you'll see on the front page are events, and it includes all the upcoming free webinars that you might have an interest in. We actually have one coming up in October called Creative and Innovative Recognition Strategies for Today's Volunteers. As you might guess, in addition to the other tweaking we need to do, today's volunteers have a different view about how they want to be thanked. So if you're not familiar with sort of where we're going there, this would be a good 1-hour webinar for you to sign up for. I've also provided a bibliography for you in the handouts. It has both an annotated bibliography of books that I recommend on the subject, as well as a list of web addresses that I have found helpful in my life. There's my name and my email, clehn@khalifa.org. As I mentioned, if you'd like a copy of the slides in order to get the links that I've embedded in this, I'm happy to send them to you. Just shoot me an email and tell me you were in this, this webinar, and I will share it with you. So to close here, I'm going to pull out the big guns because I know you won't believe just me talking about this to you. Most of you know Sally Gardner-Reed and her work. This is a quote from her 2017 book published by ALA. She says, "Friends leadership should be armed with the information they need to tell a potential volunteer exactly what he or she is being asked to do. Are they asking this person to design a brochure, work with the printer, or distribute the brochure to outside agencies? Now they're asking a potential volunteer to engage in one discrete task with an exact time frame." So Sally has adopted this view of today's volunteer as well. And I want you to think about how, for your ability to bring in boomers and Gen X, millennials and Gen Z, for you to bring in those new generation of volunteers that you want to connect to the library and the friends, you need to be sure that all the great work you're doing continues and grows into the future. And you'll have to do that by reaching out to these today's new volunteers. By the way, I'll mention, and then I'll take some questions. Sally Reed and I did a series of webinars a few years ago. I'm sure they're probably still available, but you'll have to reach out to United for Libraries to find out how to access them. I'm sure they can make that available. So I'm happy to take some questions now if there are some, Kelsey, and I'm also going to just put a picture of our Get Involved Clearinghouse on the screen while we talk, just so you can see what you might gain access to if you're interested in finding some of those resources that would help you.
Thank you so much, Carla. This webinar has been packed full of information and it's been really informative, and I'm positive all of our attendees really appreciate everything. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to get last minute questions in. I do have a bunch of comments in the questions tab thanking you and talking about how great this was. So
thank you.
Yeah, this really was wonderful. I have a quick question for you. I know earlier in the webinar you talked about making sure that you have the right volunteer for the right position and that match is thought out really well. Do you have any tips for kind of how to handle if that match doesn't work out perfectly, how you smooth that over? Do you suggest another volunteer program, or how do you think that should be handled?
Yeah, I often get asked, and it's often the question is, can I fire a volunteer? Which the answer is yes, but in all the years I've been doing this, I've only fired 2 volunteers. And is that because I didn't have some people that needed to be moved on? No, I did have some. But my message to you is, if you'll do what we talked about, and that is carefully design that job description and then carefully seek out the right person with the skills and qualifications and interests, you won't have a problem. Okay, so 99.9% of the problems will go away. However, sometimes a problem happens, and here's what I want you to do. Even if there's not a problem, I want you to periodically just walk around and say, "Hi, how are you doing? How are things going? Everything working out okay?" Because sometimes people don't feel comfortable to come and tell you that they have a problem. But if you give them an opening, then they say, "Well, yeah, I'm enjoying this, but there's one piece of the job that I'm not sure I'm doing right." And that gives you an opportunity to help them do it. Or let's say it's become clear that the volunteer didn't quite understand what the role was. Then I suggest you go right to them and say, "I like to start with something like, here's an aspect of the job that you're doing really well, but I have a feeling that I didn't do a good enough job in training you on this other piece. Could we take a few minutes just to go back over that? Because I think I might have left some things out." So put it on yourself, right? We don't want volunteers to feel like we think they're stupid, right? We want to say to them, "Let me just make sure that we were clear enough." Because if they are doing it wrong, it's because they haven't been trained right, or they don't have the skills, right? So we've either put the wrong person in the job, or we haven't given them everything they need to be successful. If you find that sometimes if you say that to somebody, they'll go, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking. I didn't know how to tell you that I really don't like this job. I really don't know how to do this. So if you can show me how to do it, that would be great. Or, actually, I'd prefer not to do this." So then that gives you the opportunity to say, "Okay, let's do some more training, or let's see if we can find another job for you here. What's your dream job? What is the favorite job you've ever had? Or what's the favorite volunteer job? Or what's your favorite skill to practice? What do you think we could get some benefit from that you know?" And if you don't have something for that person, then I refer them on to somebody else, right? One of the things I like to do is know the other volunteer coordinators in my community, right? I'm an active Girl Scout volunteer. So sometimes people will refer volunteers to me. When I was interviewing volunteers at the state library, sometimes I found really good people that didn't fit the job I was looking for, but I would refer them on to the public library because they did have skills that I knew the public library needed. So if you can know some of those possibilities, that's an awesome way to do it. Or just introduce them to volunteermatch.org or to serve.gov and show them that there is a way to reach out and find an opportunity that would make them happy. What we don't want to do is take people and make them unhappy, because then that makes us unhappy too, right? Because they're either going to act out or they're going to talk about in the community how they're not happy or that whatever, and that's not good for them. It's not good for us. So I don't know. Does that help a little bit, Kelsey, with that question?
Yes. And our next question is that you briefly indicated how today's volunteers would like to be thanked. Could you offer some suggestions on how to do that?
Sure. I think this comes from my own experience. When I used to work for United Way, some of you may have been involved in United Way, and you know that we're famous for giving everybody a plaque or a certificate. I had a volunteer come up to me after one of our events one time and say, Carla, I have a whole set of these mugs. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm getting this now. What you need to think about is what would be meaningful to the volunteer. Okay, so a recent research, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to try to guess at the numbers, but basically what the research found was that the way that people like to be thanked least is through is at an event, like at a dinner or a lunch or something like that. Now, don't let me tell you not to do that. If you've got one that's working, that's great. But what I want you to ask yourself as you're at that event is, what percentage of your volunteers are there? If it's only 50%, then how are the other 50% feeling like they've been thanked? Even if it's 90%, how are the other 10% being thanked? So you need to think beyond the traditional banquet or luncheon or whatever you've been doing. If it's working for 50% of your volunteers, that's great, but you've got to form a plan for the 50% that's not working. When I was at the state library, we actually surveyed our volunteers and asked them, how do you want to be thanked? Because we had been inviting them to a luncheon and they weren't coming. And the feedback we got from them was, the way we want to be thanked is to know what difference we made. So what we started doing is, during National Volunteer Week, we drafted a letter for our state librarian to write that included bullet points of some of the major impacts, the major things that volunteers had helped us make happen for our patrons during the year. And then we handed him a whole stack of personalized letters, and God love him, he wrote a note on every single one of them. You wouldn't have to, but that makes it so special. And we got so much back from volunteers who said, thank you so much. First of all, they felt honored to get a letter from the state librarian. And secondly, they felt great knowing what kind of an impact their volunteer and other volunteer hours were making on the organization. So, if you're not sure how your volunteers want to be thanked, it's a good thing to thank them. And if you want the specific information about that study I mentioned, I can send you the link. I just don't have it memorized. It may be in the bibliography. I'm just not sure about that.
Great. Carla, thank you again so much. Would you mind just repeating your email address one more time in case people didn't get a chance to jot it down?
Sure. It's CLEHN, as in Nancy, at Khalifa, CALIFA, F as in Frank.org. clane@khalifa.org.
Great. Thank you so much. We don't seem to have any other questions, so we'll let everyone go this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us, and Carla, thank you for taking the time.
Happy to do it. Thanks.